The moment Nadine Zeller stomped across my gravel driveway in her kitten heels, I knew trouble had arrived. She was the HOA president of our little mountainside gated community, and she wore that title like a crown made of thorns mainly for everyone else. Her perfectly manicured hand was already mid-air in a dramatic wave when I stepped out of my pickup. "Excuse me, sir. We need to talk," she called out like she was summoning a waiter. I didn't respond right away. I just tossed my tool bag into the back of the truck and took my time brushing sawdust off my flannel. That only made her more impatient. "Mr. Erwin Tarris," I said finally, walking up to her Porsche little stance. "What can I do for you, Nadine?" Her eyes flicked in surprise. She hadn't expected me to know her name, but I did. "You don't forget someone who fined your neighbor $500 for planting unauthorized daisies." "I've been reviewing properties in the HOA registry," she began, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. "And I noticed this cabin hasn't been upgraded to meet our uniform aesthetic standards. The siding is original, the deck is untreated wood, and the solar panels don't match the roof tile color. I own the place," I said flatly. "Built it with my dad back in the day. It's not going anywhere." "Well," she gave a tight smile, "it could go somewhere. I'm actually looking to purchase a second property up here. A cozy little cabin would be perfect for my son when he visits from college. I'd be willing to offer, let's say, 50,000. I blinked. "You're offering 50 grand for a cabin with lakefront access? You do know market value's closer to 200, right?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was offering me some secret treasure. "It's not really up to market value with all the violations, Erwin. As HOA president, I can get those fines stacked up real quick. You might find it easier to just sell and move on." I laughed. Honest to God, laughed in her face. "You threatening me with fines, so I'll sell you my property at a quarter of its value? I'm offering you a way out before things get complicated," she said, eyes narrowing. That's when I let it slip. "You might want to check your lease agreement before you go threatening landlords." She froze. "What? You're renting Unit 12 on Birch Lane, yeah? The one with the stone fireplace and the red shutters?" "Yes. Yeah. I own that too." Her jaw dropped. "That's impossible. My lease is through North Ridge Property Management." "And I own North Ridge," I said, reaching into the back of my truck for a clipboard. I handed her a paper. "This is your lease renewal form, due next month." Her mouth opened and closed like a trout on a dock. "You want to keep trying to strong-arm me through the HOA, Nadine?" I asked casually. "Or are we gonna play nice?" She yanked the paper from my hand and stormed off without answering. But I wasn't worried. The woman had just learned the worst possible truth. The cabin she wanted to bully me out of belonged to the same man who controlled her monthly rent. And I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I was out front with a level and a chalk line, prepping to replace a few warped boards on the railing, when a white SUV with chrome rims rolled up and parked halfway on the pine needle-covered grass. A man with a clipboard stepped out, tan slacks, tucked in polo, mirrored sunglasses. He walked with the kind of purpose only someone on a power trip carries. "You Erwin Tarris?" I nodded, not looking up. "Depends who's asking." "Daniel Lott, compliance officer for the High Pines HOA," he said, flashing a badge that looked like it came free with a box of cereal. "We've received multiple complaints regarding your property. Unapproved construction activity, failure to match community design standards, and non-compliant landscaping." I raised an eyebrow. "Landscaping? You mean the pine trees?" He ignored that. "I'm here to deliver official notice. You have 14 days to submit a remediation plan or face escalating penalties, starting at $200 per day. I took the paper he handed me, glanced at it, then folded it neatly and put it in my back pocket. "Did Nadine send you?" I don't answer to residents, he replied. I answer to the board, which she chairs. He shifted his weight. That's not relevant. Sure it is, I said, wiping my hands on a rag. Because you just handed me a notice that references a bylaw revision that was never approved by vote. I attended the last 2 meetings. Nothing passed. He faltered for a half second. That's an internal matter. No, it's a legal one, I said. And if you're enforcing unratified amendments, you're overstepping your authority. Daniel's mouth twitched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he turned and headed back to his SUV without another word. By noon, I had a plan. I spent the rest of the day digging through paper files in my storage shed. My dad kept every document since the property was surveyed: permits, receipts, even a hand-drawn plat map from the original county registration. I found what I needed tucked inside a yellowing envelope, a notarized easement agreement from 32 years ago, signed by the original developer. That night, I drove into town and sat down with a friend of mine, Darla Schmidt, a real estate attorney who knew the local codes like the back of her hand. She read over the documents while sipping her tea, eyebrows slowly rising. This easement gives you utility and access rights across 3 parcels that have since been absorbed by the HOA's private road system, she said. That means they can't restrict your access or impose usage fees unless they renegotiate the easement. And if they try, they'd be opening themselves up to a civil suit. And if they've been collecting fees from other properties with similar grandfathered easements, that's fraud. I leaned back in the chair. You think they have? Darla gave a small nod. Let me look into the plat history and billing records. If they've been charging for services they don't legally control, this could blow back hard. The next morning, I installed a motion-activated camera on the pine just inside my fence line. Not because I expected trouble, but because I knew people like Nadine didn't back off quietly. Sure enough, by Thursday, someone had tried to tamper with the lock on my utility box. They left a scratch pattern consistent with a screwdriver, and the camera caught a figure in a windbreaker with the HOA logo on the sleeve at precisely 2 a.m. I made copies of the footage and brought it straight to the sheriff's office. Deputy Mallory shook his head when he saw it. That's breaking and entering, Erwin. And since it's a utility box, it might qualify as tampering with infrastructure. That's a felony. I figured as much. I'd like to file a formal report. We'll need to identify the individual. Any idea who wears that jacket? Only seen it on Daniel lot so far. Deputy Mallory sighed. He was a beat cop in another county before he got canned for tampering with evidence. Didn't know he ended up here. That was more than I expected. I nodded. Appreciate the info. By Friday, the story had started to percolate. I didn't need to spread rumors. Small towns do that on their own. Word got around that the HOA was issuing fines based on policies that didn't exist, and that someone had tried to sabotage private property. The neighbor across the road, Mr. Halverson, dropped by with a plate of cornbread and whispered, "You got him shaking, son." About time someone stood up to him. Saturday morning brought a new development. A flyer had been taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood. Bold red letters at the top read, "Urgent Community Meeting, HOA Emergency Session." I showed up 5 minutes early and took a seat in the back of the clubhouse. The room buzzed with tension. Nadine sat at the front behind a folding table, flanked by 2 board members and Daniel, whose face had all the warmth of a granite countertop. She cleared her throat into a microphone. "Residents, thank you for coming. We're here to address recent misinformation and disturbances that have created confusion about the authority of the HOA. A hand shot up from the middle row. It was Mrs. Kwan, who ran the local bakery and rarely spoke at these things. What about the complaint that someone broke into Mr. Tarris's property? Are we going to talk about that? Nadine pursed her lips. That's a private matter. It is not on tonight's agenda. Then came Halverson. And what about the vote on those new bylaws? I don't remember ever casting a ballot. Nadine's eyes flicked toward Daniel, who leaned into the mic. Due to administrative constraints, the board enacted emergency provisions without full community ratification, which is permissible under. No, it's not, I said, rising from my chair. Not under our charter, not under county code, and not under the bylaws filed with the registrar. I have copies here if anyone wants to see them. I laid out the documents on the back table. Within seconds, a crowd began forming. Neighbors leaned in, flipping pages, whispering. I stepped forward. Here's the truth, I said. They've been issuing fines without legal authority. They've modified rules without votes. And someone on this board tried to sabotage my electrical system in the middle of the night. That's not management. That's criminal. Nadine stood abruptly. You have no proof of any of that. I gave the footage to the sheriff. They're opening an investigation into Daniel Lott for attempted tampering with utility infrastructure. And while they're at it, they're reviewing the HOA's financials. Because if you've been collecting money based on fraudulent policy enforcement, that's wire fraud. The room erupted. People stood, shouting questions, demanding answers. Nadine tried to regain control, but her voice was drowned out. Daniel slipped out the side door. I didn't have to say another word. By Monday, Darla had sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA on behalf of a growing group of residents. The sheriff's office issued a summons for Daniel, and the county registrar placed a hold on all active HOA enforcement actions pending an audit of their procedures. Nadine's rental renewal? She signed it, with a 50% increase. By the time the county's audit began, Nadine had vanished from the clubhouse meetings entirely. Her newly subdued presence didn't fool anyone. She was working behind the scenes, and I knew it. I just hadn't figured out how far she was willing to go until I found the letter. It was taped to my front door on a Thursday afternoon, folded in half with no return address, just typed in all caps. Notice of property reclassification under Section 4.3 of the High Pines Covenant. I read it twice, then again. According to the letter, the HOA had petitioned the county to have my cabin and 4 other lots reclassified as non-conforming structures, based on an obscure clause from the original developer's filing. If approved, the reclassification would strip our properties of voting rights in HOA matters and make us subject to full architectural review, even though we were built decades prior to the HOA's formation. They were trying to rewrite history. I drove straight to the county assessor's office. The receptionist, a woman named Judy I'd known since I was a kid, waved me through once she saw the envelope. Let me guess, she said. Someone's trying to play zoning games again. Looks like it, I said, laying the letter out on her desk. You seen this? She scanned it, her lips tightening. This citation doesn't even match the current registry. They're quoting a version that hasn't been in use since the early 90s. Can they still push it through? Not without a formal hearing. And not if the properties in question have been consistently taxed under residential status for over 20 years, which yours have. Can I get a certified copy of that? Judy printed it on the spot, stamping it with her seal. They're getting desperate. Not 2 hours later, I got a call from Darla. They filed a fraud complaint against you, she said, claiming you forged the original easement to avoid paying shared maintenance fees. I stared at the road ahead, gripping the steering wheel tighter. That's impossible. It's notarized, filed, and backed by the county records. They know that, she said. This isn't about winning. It's about burying you in legal mud so they can outlast you. I exhaled through my nose. Then we go on offense. The next morning, Darla filed a motion with the county civil court requesting injunctive relief. We weren't just asking to have their reclassification attempt tossed out, we were asking for a temporary freeze on all HOA enforcement power until the audit and criminal investigation were complete. And we had more than enough evidence. That same week, the sheriff's department executed a warrant at the HOA's office. The county clerk had discovered discrepancies in the financial statements submitted alongside their annual renewal. Namely, that their legal fund had ballooned by over $70,000 in under a year without any corresponding vote or assessment. Turns out, they'd been collecting unauthorized compliance fees from new buyers, tacking on charges at closing and funneling the money into an unregistered account under Nadine's name. And the kicker? The notary stamp on those charges had been forged. Deputies seized hard drives, printed ledgers, and several boxes of unsigned fine notices pre-filled with resident names and blank infraction descriptions. According to the warrant notes, they also found a spreadsheet titled Red Zone Properties. Mine was at the top of the list. That night, I walked across the road to Halverson's. A group of us had started meeting informally in his garage, the unofficial resistance. There were 9 of us now, most older, a few newer residents who'd been hit with fines for things like unharmonious mailbox color and excessive wind chime noise. "Her name's on the account?" asked Mrs. Kwan, eyes wide. "Direct deposit trails, too," I said. "They're going to trace every dollar. If she used even a penny for personal expenses." "She's cooked," Halverson finished. "She's already cooked," I said. "We just need to keep the fire lit." None of us celebrated yet. It wasn't over. Not until the board was dissolved and the neighborhood was free from the chokehold they'd built over the years. That Sunday I got a visitor. He drove up in a forest green sedan with government plates and stepped out in a blazer despite the heat. Introduced himself as Assistant District Attorney Reuben Keller. Said he was heading the white-collar crimes division for this case. "I wanted to speak with you directly," he said. "You've been central to this investigation." I led him onto the porch, offered him a bottle of water. He declined. "We're preparing to file charges against Nadine Zeller and 2 other board members," he said. "Wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to defraud, and possibly obstruction. The financial evidence is solid, but your footage and testimony provide the behavioral pattern we need." "You think it'll go to trial?" "Almost certainly," he said. "We're expecting them to lawyer up hard." But the sheriff's office recovered handwritten notes from her office, including one referencing your cabin as a target acquisition. That's motive. I leaned back in the chair, letting the breeze roll over me. What about the HOA itself? We're filing a parallel suit to place it under court-appointed receivership. If successful, a neutral administrator will oversee operations until the community can vote on whether to dissolve or restructure it. I didn't say anything right away. Keller looked out across the lake. "You built this place with your father?" "Yeah. Long time ago." He nodded. "People like her. They forget that neighborhoods aren't assets. They're communities. You reminded them." He left me his card and drove off, tires crunching softly on the gravel. By Wednesday, the entire board had resigned. Not voluntarily, the court had issued a temporary suspension of all HOA authority pending the outcome of the criminal trial. In their place, a 3-person oversight panel was installed, made up of longtime residents with clean records and no financial entanglements. A town hall was scheduled in the elementary school gymnasium. The turnout exceeded the fire code limit. People stood along the walls, sat on the floor, leaned against the bleachers. And for the first time in years, everyone spoke freely. They told stories about threats, fines, manipulative letters, and retaliatory landscaping citations. One woman broke down describing how she'd paid over $8,000 in penalties just to avoid a lien on her home. The oversight panel took notes, asked questions, and promised transparency. They also announced that every single fine issued over the past 3 years would be subject to review, and if found unlawful, reversed. I didn't speak until the end. "I'm not here to gloat," I said. "I'm here because this place matters to me. It mattered to my father. And it should matter to all of us, not as a set of rules, but as a place where people live and work and raise their kids. That's what they forgot. Let's not forget it again." Applause wasn't what I was after, but it came anyway. Later that night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching a few kids ride their bikes down the hill where the HOA once threatened speed bumps. Cardinal landed on the railing. The lake shimmered in the moonlight. The mailbox still had a dent from where Daniel Lott kicked it on his way out. I left it that way, a reminder of what happens when people try to buy power they haven't earned and meet someone who won't sell. I was halfway through replacing the cabin's porch screen more for the mosquitoes than for the view when a knock landed on my front door. Not the usual tap-tap of a neighbor dropping off muffins, either. This was the kind of heavy knock that brought a chill with it. I opened the door to find 2 plainclothes investigators standing under the eave. One was tall and broad-shouldered with a canvas folder tucked under his arm. The other, shorter, had a notepad out before I even said hello. "Erwin Tarris?" the tall one asked. "Yeah. What's this about?" "Special Agents Donnelly and Fraser. We're with the State Attorney General's Task Force on Municipal Corruption. Mind if we come in?" I stepped aside, motioned them toward the dining table. "Let me guess this is about the HOA. Agent Fraser nodded, flipping open her notepad. "We've been tracking a pattern of misconduct across multiple associations in this region. What you uncovered here may be bigger than localized fraud." I pulled out the chair across from them. "You think Nadine's part of a broader network?" Donnelly opened the folder and laid out a photo of a man I didn't recognize, gray-haired, thin, with glasses and a permanent scowl. "That's Martin Glade. He runs a consulting company called Civic Stratagems LLC. Technically, it's a property services firm, but in practice, they install loyal board members in small HOAs, then exploit legal gray areas to siphon money through shell maintenance contracts." "And Nadine worked with him?" Fraser tapped a printed email chain. "We have correspondence between her and Glade dating back almost 4 years. She was recruited after Civic Stratagems helped her win her first contested election. In exchange, she funneled contracts to Glade's companies and implemented policies designed to extract maximum fines from homeowners." I sat back. "So this wasn't just a power trip. It was a pipeline." "Exactly," Donnelly said. "And the financials Darla uncovered? That gave us probable cause to raid Civic Stratagems' office in Fairmont. What we found confirmed it: fraudulent billing, forged inspection reports, phantom landscaping crews. All approved through HOA boards they helped install." Fraser looked up from her notes. "Yours is the first community to push back hard enough to break it open. We're building a RICO case." I exhaled slowly. "You're going after them under racketeering?" "They operated across county lines, used intimidation, and profited from a pattern of coercion," she said. "That qualifies." I didn't ask how deep it went. I already knew. The way Nadine had carried herself, the speed with which she tried to bury me in paperwork and legal threats, it wasn't improvised. It was policy. And she'd just been another cog in a bigger machine. Fraser handed me a subpoena. "We'll need you to testify. You're the only one who can speak to the timeline from the moment they tried to acquire your cabin." I nodded. "I'll be there." Later that week, I got a call from Lawrence Yates, the interim administrator now overseeing what was left of the HOA. He asked if I could attend a special session they were holding in the community lodge, not a meeting, more of a reckoning. When I walked in, the place was nearly full. Not just residents, but a few folks from nearby neighborhoods who'd heard what happened. Yates stood at the front with a stack of binders and a tired but determined look on his face. "We've completed our review of the HOA's actions over the past 6 years," he began. "The findings are extensive. Improper fines, illegal amendments, misuse of funds, and in several cases, direct violations of state law." He paused, letting that hang in the air. "Every resident who was fined during that time will receive a formal letter outlining their case. If your fine was unlawful, you'll be reimbursed. If you were overcharged, we'll correct it. And if you were harassed, we filed a victim impact statement with the AG's office." Hands went up. Questions poured out. Some asked about liens. Others about forced landscaping contracts. One woman asked if her late husband's fine for a non-regulation tool shed could be removed from the record, even though he'd passed. Yates promised it would. I stayed quiet until the very end, when he looked toward me and said, "Erwin, would you like to say something?" I stood slowly, not because I needed to, but because I owed them the truth. "I didn't start this to bring anybody down," I said. "I just wanted to be left alone in the home my father and I built. But they came after me, not just with fines or letters, but with lies, sabotage, and threats." The room was still. Even the kids in the back had gone quiet. "But the part that matters isn't that I pushed back. It's that all of you did too. You asked questions. You spoke up. And you didn't let fear win." I gestured toward the windows, where you could see the lake through the pines. "This place is supposed to feel like home, not a trap. And now it does again." Applause came not loud, but steady. It wasn't celebration. It was relief. 2 weeks later, I was in a courtroom 3 counties over for the start of Nadine's trial. She sat at the defense table in a navy suit, her hair pulled back tight. No more designer sunglasses, no more clipboard, no more power. Just another defendant with too much to explain. The prosecutors laid it out with surgical precision: emails, bank transfers, recorded calls, and testimony from former board members who'd turned state's evidence. When they called me up, the courtroom watched in silence. "I was approached by Nadine under the pretense of a friendly offer," I said. "But when I declined, she attempted to use HOA authority to pressure me into selling. When that failed, she escalated to fines and false violations. When that didn't work, someone tried to tamper with my utilities. The defense tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that she had been misled by third parties. But the jury didn't buy it. Neither did the judge. Nadine was convicted on 5 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and malicious misuse of civil authority. She was sentenced to 6 years, with no possibility of holding any residential board position ever again. As for Martin Glade, he was arrested shortly after and indicted on 17 counts, including wire fraud, racketeering, and obstruction. His empire crumbled in under a month, and so did the HOAs he infected. Back in High Pines, we voted this time with full transparency. The majority chose to dissolve the HOA entirely. The county assumed responsibility for basic road maintenance, and all previous bylaws were rendered null. The clubhouse was converted into a community center, open to anyone who wanted to organize a potluck, teach a class, or host a book club. No approvals, no forms, no fines. I kept the cabin, rebuilt the porch swing, even got the screen to sit flush again. One evening, I sat outside watching the wind play across the lake. A few neighbors biked past with fishing rods sticking out of their backpacks. Mrs. Kwan waved from her car. Someone was grilling down by the dock, whatever it was. It smelled like heaven. The mailbox still had that dent, just above the latch. Every now and then, I'd get a letter from someone, another homeowner from another town, asking how we did it, how we stood up, how we won. I'd always write back the same way. Start with the truth. Then don't back down from it. The rest will follow.